Episode 9, and the spine has moved to verify. This is the episode the series was built around. 8 episodes have shown agents that store, organize, control and change themselves, and not one of them established that a change was an improvement. That gap has a name, it has a mechanism, and it has a fix whose shape turns out to be the same in 3 separate literatures. I should say at the outset that the name is not mine and neither is the pipeline, both come from one paper, and the second slide of this section says so explicitly, because getting that right matters more here than anywhere else in the series. Here is the shape, and if you watched episode 7 you have seen it before. An agent evolves over rounds of self-generated experience, and you record 2 things at each round. Stated confidence rises the whole way. Accuracy peaks early and then declines. Episode 7 showed exactly this picture on a prompt tuning loop and deliberately refused to name it, because the name belongs here. This is the self-confirmation trap. And the reason it is worth a whole episode is not that it is surprising once described, it is that nothing inside the system can distinguish the rising line from the falling one. The rising line is the one a dashboard shows you, and the falling one is the one you find out about later. 3 objectives. State precisely why self-generated experience can raise confidence while lowering accuracy, precisely, because the loose version of this claim is everywhere and it is not actionable. Instantiate and execute, distill, verify pipeline with a concrete verifier at each stage, where concrete is the operative word. And attach a proof obligation to every memory write, which is the deliverable you could apply this week. This episode also carries more attribution work than any other, because its central framework and its central axis come from 2 different papers and neither is ours. 3 slides of this episode do nothing but assign credit, and I think they are worth their runtime. And 4 times before this. Episode 3, reflections carry pointers to their evidence and are never rechecked, so a belief is traceable and never withdrawn. Episode 6, the automatic curriculum moves its own frontier, and nothing outside the loop checks whether the direction is useful. Episode 7, 12 revisions, validation rising, held out test falling after the 4th. Episode 8, the group's own agreement standing in for verification. 4 architectures, 4 different mechanisms, 1 failure. That recurrence is the whole argument for treating this structurally rather than patching it case by case. Once is an anecdote, twice is a coincidence, and 4 times in 4 different architectures is a structural property. So let me get the attribution right before anything else. The trap is named and defined by 1 paper, wrong but self-consistent trajectories mistakenly treated as successful experience. And the definition continues in a way that matters, error then accumulates through later retrieval and reuse. Which tells you the right is not the failure. The reuse is. That same paper contributes the execute, distill, verify pipeline that the middle third of this episode is built on, and this episode's title is that paper's title. Our own series plan listed it as one reference among several, which understated it. This slide is the correction. Borrowing a framework and quietly presenting it as your own framing is the failure this series was built to avoid. The failure mode is worth stating carefully, because it is not incoherence. It is coherence without contact. A trajectory that reaches a plausible end state, with each step following from the last, looks exactly like a successful one from the inside. And the agent that produced it is the agent that summarizes it, with the same model supplying both the trajectory and the judgment of it. So there is no term anywhere in that loop that was not produced by the thing being evaluated. Self-consistency is the only signal available, and self-consistency is satisfied. Apparent progress conceals flawed reasoning because progress and correctness are being measured by the same instrument. Here is what that does over rounds. Round 1 has a spread of behaviors, some good and some poor. Each round, the experience that survived becomes the training signal for the next one. Watch the spread rather than the mean, because the mean can hold steady while this happens. The mode sharpens and the tails disappear. And the tails are exactly where the corrections were, the unusual trajectory that would have contradicted the consensus, the failure that would have been informative. Losing them is what makes the loop unrecoverable from inside, because the evidence that something is wrong was in the part that got thinned away. A distribution that has lost its tails looks healthier by every internal measure than the one that had them. Which resolves the picture we opened with. Confidence tracks internal agreement. Accuracy tracks the world. Self-generated experience raises internal agreement by construction, that is simply what narrowing a distribution does to it. It has no comparable effect on contact with the world, and it can actively reduce that by discarding the disagreeing cases. So the two curves are not a paradox and not a bug. They are two different quantities, one of which the loop is optimizing and the other of which it cannot observe. The mechanism there is the papers, framing the divergence as two distinct quantities is my own reading. Anything that optimizes a quantity it cannot observe will eventually be measuring something else. The pipeline, and again the attribution first, the three-stage names and the requirement that different parties run them are the papers. Execute. Several heterogeneous agents explore the same task space in parallel, producing diverse candidate trajectories. Distill. A designated third-party agent compares those trajectories and produces candidate experiences. Verify. The execution group jointly validates the candidates, and only what passes gets written to memory. Three words are carrying the design there: heterogeneous, third-party, and jointly. Take any one of them out and you are back to an agent grading its own work. Notice that none of the three stages is new on its own. The contribution is the assignment of them to different parties. Here it runs. Trajectories enter from several executors at once, and they disagree with each other, which is the point of using heterogeneous ones. The distiller compares them and proposes candidate experiences, and note where it sits, because it did not produce any of the trajectories it is comparing. The verification gate then admits some candidates and rejects others. Watch the counter. Only what passes reaches memory, and everything else is discarded before it can ever be retrieved. Which matters because of the definition on slide 5, the harm came from reuse, so a gate before insertion is the earliest place it can be stopped. The gate sits before insertion rather than before retrieval, and that ordering is the design. So look at who does each job, because the design is entirely in the assignment. Execute uses several agents deliberately unlike each other, because disagreement is the raw material and identical executors produce correlated errors. Distill uses a third party that ran none of the trajectories, which removes the executor's incentive to summarize its own work favorably. Verify uses the execution group jointly, by consensus, so no single agent can admit its own experience alone. Now read down that third column. Every one of the three is a separation, of behavior, of interest, or of authority. Hold that thought, it comes back. Separation of behavior, of interest, of authority, the same three separations an auditor would ask you about. And it is measured. On long horizon benchmarks, an average pass-at-1 of 86.6 against 83.5 for a router baseline and 81.5 for a judge baseline, with no memory single models between 76 and 80. Mind 2 web overall, 58.1 against 56. Now the part worth pausing on is what the comparison is against. A judge baseline already adds a checking step, so the gain over that one is not the value of checking at all. It is the value of separating the roles that do the checking from the roles that did the work. A comparison against a baseline that already checks is far more informative than one against a baseline that does not. Which raises a contradiction I want to face rather than skate past. Episode 8 said the group's own agreement standing in for verification is the trap at population scale. And this paper's verify stage is group agreement, and it measurably helps. Both are true. Episode 8's group shared a store and homogeneous agents, so their agreement was correlated by construction. This design decorrelates it, heterogeneous executors, a third-party distiller, so agreement now carries information it did not carry before. But no term in that loop is external to the system. Episode 8's statement is a sealing rather than a refutation. Facing a contradiction between two of your own episodes is more useful than quietly rewording one of them. Second attribution, and this one corrects our own plan. The verification hierarchy is our 45's term and our 45's axis, formal verifiers at the strong end, intrinsic self-assessment at the weak end. And our 45 adds an observation I find genuinely uncomfortable, that demonstrated self-improvement strength distributes along that axis. The stronger the verifier, the weaker the improvement anyone has managed to show. That observation is the paper's, not mine. Our series plan listed this latter as an author synthesis, and it is not. What is mine comes on the next 3 slides, reading the axis as separation, 7 concrete rungs, and a cost for each. Getting this backwards would have put our name on somebody else's axis in the pivotal episode of the series. Here is my reading of that axis, offered as a reading rather than as the paper's claim. The strength of a verifier is how little it shares with the thing it checks. At the strong end, a checker that shares no state, no model and no reward with the system under test, it can be wrong, but it cannot be wrong in the same direction. At the weak end, the system's own opinion of its own output, which shares everything, so its errors are perfectly correlated with the errors it is supposed to catch. Everything in between is a partial separation, and the axis measures how much of it you bought. So here are 7 rungs you can actually build, with what each costs and what it covers. Schema and type checks, very cheap, structural only. Rule engines and logic programs, cheap, and they cover whatever you took the trouble to encode. Constraint solvers, medium cost, formalizable properties. Unit test oracles, medium, and they cover the cases you thought of. Execution replay, medium to high, and it covers whatever actually ran. Cross-model consistency, expensive, and it buys agreement rather than truth. Human spot audit, very expensive, and it covers a sample deeply. These 7 and their costs are my addition. The axis underneath them is not. Build the cheap ones first, and instrument them, because an uninstrumented verifier is indistinguishable from none. Here is the ladder with both quantities on it. 7 rungs, cost rising as you climb, and a coverage bar beside each one. The bars widen as you go up, but not monotonically, and the exceptions are where the engineering decisions live. Watch cross-model consistency. It is expensive and its bar does not widen much, because running 3 models and comparing them buys you agreement, and agreement is what the trap already had. Then watch execution replay, cheaper, and its bar is wider, because replaying what actually ran introduces a term the system did not generate. Those two rungs are the argument of the next slide. The inversion between those two rungs is worth more to a small team than any single result in this episode. Put strength on one axis and cost on the other, and they do not line up. Cheap and weak, cross-model consistency, which is cheap per query and buys agreement. Cheap and strong, execution replay, which reintroduces a term the system did not produce. Expensive and weak, a confession channel, which we come to in a moment. Expensive and strong, solvers and human audit. The off-diagonal cells are the entire point of drawing this. Cheap and strong is what to build first, and expensive and weak is what to stop paying for, and cross-model voting is the one that people keep paying for, because it feels like verification. Draw this grid for your own stack once, and the next 6 months of verification spending decides itself. Which lets me place something from episode 6 precisely. That system judges itself with a panel, several specialized reviewers and an area chair. It is a real improvement in structure, dimensions are separated, reviewers must cite evidence, and a meta-decision replaces averaging. But every reviewer and the chair are instantiated with one model, and that model also serves as the memory manager and the router. So the judges share a model with the components they judge, and on the reading 3 slides ago, the separation is 0. Decomposing an intrinsic evaluator makes the weak end more legible. It does not make it stronger. Legibility and strength are different properties, and conflating them is how a panel of judges becomes a substitute for a check. The last remedy is different in kind. A model is asked, after answering, to give a full account of how well it complied with its instructions, a confession, requested afterwards rather than woven into the answer. And it is trained, a frontier reasoning model is trained to produce these, then evaluated out of distribution on hallucination, instruction following, scheming and reward hacking. The reported finding is that when the model lies or omits shortcomings in its main answer, it often confesses to those behaviors honestly. I am keeping the papers hedges, because they are the papers. Honesty improves modestly with training, and the justification offered is partial. A remedy aimed at the model's willingness to report, rather than at the loop structure, is a genuinely different kind of intervention. And here is the design, which is the same move as slide 11 in different clothing. The answer's reward is computed on task performance, as usual. The confession's reward is computed solely on the confession's honesty, and it does not affect the answer's reward at all. That separation is what makes honesty the path of least resistance. Surfacing a shortcoming cannot cost you the task reward, because the two channels do not touch. Fuse them and the incentive inverts immediately, because a confession admitting failure would reduce the score it is attached to. The paper says exactly this: the honesty relies on the separation. Two channels that never touch is a design you can inspect in a diagram, which is more than most safety arguments offer. And here is the limit, stated as a placement rather than a complaint. A confession is still produced by the system under test. It is a report, and a report can be complete, honest, and still wrong about the world, because the model can sincerely believe a false thing. On my earlier reading, it is a partial separation. The reward channel is separated, the model is not. What it does by is real, monitoring, rejection sampling, surfacing issues to a human. But those are interventions rather than verifications. So it belongs in the expensive and weak cell, and knowing that is what stops you spending a formal verification budget on a monitoring tool. So here is the episode in one slide. Every fix for self-confirmation is a separation, and only the axis of separation changes. By role, who executes, who distills, who verifies, 3 parties, and no self-admission. By reward channel, the confession's reward cannot touch the answer's reward. By ownership, the rollback path and the stopping condition held by someone the agent cannot reach. 3 literatures, 3 mechanisms, 1 shape. And the verification hierarchy is the measure of how much of it you achieved, which explains its uncomfortable observation, because separation costs you exactly the coupling that made the loop fast in the first place. If you remember one slide from this series, I would like it to be this one. Which brings the deliverable. The 4C lens has been a way of looking at memory since episode 1, here it becomes an admission test, with 1 obligation per axis. Correct, grounded in an execution or a named source, not in a summary of itself. Consistent, no contradiction with what the store already holds, and that is 1 query, not a review. Current, a validity interval set at right time, which is episode 5's 4 clocks doing their job. Complete, the required fields present, including provenance, and the identity of whatever wrote it. For checks, each cheap, each mechanical. For mechanical checks beat 1 thoughtful review, because the mechanical ones actually run every time. And 3 verdicts rather than 2. Admit, all 4 obligations discharged, so write it and record that they were. Admit with flag, 1 obligation unmet but the right is still useful, so write it, mark it, and let retrieval decide what to do about the mark. Quarantine, an obligation is contradicted rather than merely unmet, so hold it outside the store. The middle verdict is the one systems lack and the one that makes this usable, because a binary gate gets switched off in its first week, the moment it rejects something somebody needed. The cost is fixed and statable, 3 checks per write, 1 sampled audit per session. Design the middle verdict first and the other 2 follow, design the binary version and it will be disabled. Lab 9. Add 1 consistency check to your write path, just 1, the cheapest contradiction query you can write. Run it over a week of writes in shadow mode, so it records a verdict and blocks nothing. Then count the rejections, read 10 of them, and decide in each case whether the check was wrong or the right was. Shadow mode is the whole design here, you get the number without the risk, and you get it from your own traffic rather than from a paper. If the count is 0, either your store is unusually clean or your check is inert, and reading 10 cases tells you which. 5 takeaways. The trap and the execute, distill, verify pipeline are both 1 papers, and the verification hierarchy is another's. 3 slides in this episode exist to say so, and I would rather spend 3 slides than get it wrong. Coherence without contact, the loop optimizes internal agreement and cannot observe accuracy. Every fix is a separation, by role, by reward channel or by ownership, and only the axis changes. The strength of a verifier is how little it shares with what it checks, cheap and strong exists, and cross-model voting is not it. And attach 4 obligations to every write, with 3 verdicts, because the middle verdict is what keeps the gate switched on.